welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and it's time for another deck tech. It is my first deck tech from Strixhaven. I'm going to do a few. I'm not going to go crazy like I did with Kaldheim, but there's definitely a lot of really interesting build-arounds in this set. And today I am doing Mavinda Student's Advocate. So it's a 3-mana white bird advisor, 2/3 flying. It has this very unique 0 ability where you pay 0, right? So it has no cost for its activation, even though it is still an activated ability. You may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn. If that spell doesn't target a creature you control, it costs 8 more to cast this way. If this spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Activate only once each turn. So even though this costs no activation, you can only do it once each turn, and essentially you can only use it to cast spells that target your creatures, right? Like I said when I did my spoiler video, you can use this if you're absolutely desperate. You can pay 9 mana to cast a Path to Exile from your graveyard and exile your opponent's Blightsteel Colossus if you're about to die. So I guess it is nice that that option is there. But obviously you want to build this deck around targeting your own creatures, right? And I went over a few ideas, in the spoiler video about what you could do with it. But then I remembered, I had compared it to Feather. And obviously a lot of people are going to put Mavinda in a Feather deck. That ability works fantastic in a Feather deck because, it says if that spell would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead. So it's not going to get exiled because Feather's ability is going to put it back in your hand. So it goes from your graveyard, exiled by Feather, and then back into your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So I think Mavinda, I don't have a Feather deck, and that's pretty, that's a pretty packed deck already, but I think you're probably going to want to find room for this. So that being said, when Feather was first spoiled, I was one of the people that was kind of excited about building it, but my strategy was way different than anyone else's, right? Everyone does the sort of the Voltron / cantrip strategy with Feather. For me, I thought it made a fantastic blink commander, right? Because all of the blink spells are targeting your creatures, right? So you can, again, and if somebody wants to make a Feather deck with this strategy, they can. You just blink all your creatures, right? And you keep getting those blink spells back because blink spells, for the most part, all target your creatures. So I thought, you know what? Why don't I do that with Mavinda? So that's the strategy of this deck, right? We're going to be casting all kinds of blink spells, and there are plenty of them in white. I actually have 10 in the deck, right? So I have 10 blink spells of varying different types that we're going to cast on our creatures and then cast again from our graveyard, right? So basically we get a double use. I'm not going to name them all. There's a couple though that I think are worth mentioning, like Eerie Interlude is probably the best of the bunch because I can exile any number of target creatures. Again, this is another spell that gets used in Feather decks a lot. So I can target a bunch of my creatures, and because it is targeting one of my creatures, then I can reuse it again from the graveyard, right? I really like Settle Beyond Reality. 5 mana, 4 and white, sorcery. Choose one or both. Exile target creature you don't control. Exile target creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control. So this is going to target, right? This is going to target our creatures. So we can use this to blink our creature and exile another creature. Then it goes to the graveyard because we can choose both, right? And because it is going to be targeting our creature we control, we can again exile someone else's creature and blink one of our creatures at the same time. I do have a few other spells, though, that aren't blinking that I think fit the strategy. Sejiri Shelter, right? Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. It's also an MDFC land, so you could probably put this, like a lot of people I find from doing a lot of my deck doctor type videos are just putting MDFC lands in here regardless of what they do. I think at least, because it is a land that comes into play tapped, you should at least have something that at least fits your deck a little bit. And this fits our deck, right? Because we are going to be targeting our creatures with it. Valorous Stance is fantastic, I think, in this deck. This is a favorite of mine that I use in a lot of decks. 1 and a white, instant. You choose one, right? I love modal cards. Target creature gains indestructible in the turn, or destroy target creature with toughness 4 or greater. So you can use this to destroy one of your opponent's creatures. It goes to the graveyard, and then you can reuse it to make a creature, like particularly our commander, indestructible. And then I put Change of Heart in this deck. And again, I always put these sort of nostalgia cards. This is a card, man, I must have opened up about 20 of these in packs back in the day because Stronghold was the first set that came out when I first started playing Magic. Fantastic art. I love Ron Spencer art. I think this is actually Karn, and he's having a conversation with the Sliver Queen. Maybe he's convincing her to have a change of heart. I don't know. But the important thing here is it has buyback. And just like I was talking about with Feather, and how you can sort of manipulate that ability of Mavinda's to get it back into your hand rather than have it exiled. Buyback is another way that you can do that. Unfortunately, there wasn't any great, I was like, oh, buyback would work great with this. Unfortunately, not a lot of great buyback spells. It's got to target a creature of ours, right? However, what we can do is we pay 1, target creature cannot attack this turn. So we use this on one of our opponent's creatures, right? You know, your Blightsteel Colossus can't attack, goes to the graveyard. Then we can pay 4 with the buyback, right? So from our graveyard, we use Mavinda's ability, we pay the normal 1 plus the 3 buyback, so we're paying 4, and we target our own creature, right? This time we have to target one of our creatures or it's going to cost 8 more. So we pay 4, target our own creature. It's an instant, so we can just do it on our opponent's end step or something. And then we pay the 4, we get it back in our hand, so now we can reuse it again on our opponent's creatures. And I just thought it was neat to, have a card like that we could just keep reusing and reusing over and over and over. And then, of course, we have a ton of creatures that we want to be blinking. There is 20 creatures in this deck that are good blink targets. And Skyclave Apparition is probably one of the best. It's really a fantastic card. Exiles a non-land, non-token permanent with converted mana cost 4 or less. Just fantastic. We can just keep doing that over and over. I like Sunblast Angel too. You can either do a blink, like a Cloud Shift blink, where it blinks immediately and then just destroys your opponent's whole army before they can touch you. Or you can, if some other opponent is getting attacked, you just let them get hit. And then you use a different blink spell, like an Eerie Interlude, that is going to return it at the beginning of the next end step, so your opponent takes the damage, and then the Sunblast Angel comes in at the end of turn and destroys all their creatures. I also like Deadeye Harpooner, 2 and a white Dwarf Warrior, 2/2. He has Revolt. This works particularly well with blinking. When Deadeye Harpooner enters the battlefield, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, destroy target tap creature an opponent controls. So we just blink Deadeye Harpooner, right? He's leaving the battlefield and then coming back, so his ability is always going to apply. Duplicant is a fantastic one, right? It's going to exile a creature, so that's an auto-include. I really like Cavalier of Dawn, very underplayed card in the format. Again, it enters the battlefield and you destroy target non-land permanent. Any non-land permanent, creatures, artifacts, enchantments, they get a 3/3 artifact golem, so what? And then when it dies, you return an artifact or enchantment card from your grave to your hand. Fantastic card. And then I also have Lumbering Battlement, 4 and a white beast, 4/5 with vigilance. When Lumbering Battlement enters the battlefield, exile any number of non-token creatures you control until it leaves the battlefield, and it gets +2/+2 for each. So this is a way we can continually blink our creatures, right? So we can put Lumbering Battlement into play, exile all our other creatures, and then we blink our Lumbering Battlement, and then as he leaves the battlefield, all of our other creatures come in, right? Our Skyclave Apparition and our Duplicant, they come in. We do a bunch of damage with them. And then at, say, the beginning of our next end step, the Lumbering Battlement comes back into play. And then we exile them again. And then we can keep repeating that effect, right? And then a couple of cards that we are not going to be blinking that also fit really well in the deck. Hero of Bredegard. I mean, this is just an absolute perfect fit, right? Whenever you exile one or more cards from your hand and or permanents from the battlefield, put that many +1/+1 counters on Hero of Bredegard. So just like in my Raynar deck, this is just an absolute perfect fit if you're going to be exiling a lot. We have a lot of exile effects in this deck, period, like Path to Exile and whatnot. On top of that, though, we're going to be blinking, so this guy's going to get huge. As long as Hero of Bredegard has 5 or more counters on it, it has flying as an angel. As long as it has 10 or more counters, that is indestructible, and it's a god. So yeah, I think that's going to work great in this deck. I put Thalia's Geistcaller in here. I thought this was an interesting fit. 2 and a white, human cleric, 3/1 with lifelink. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token, right? And then you can sacrifice a spirit to make Thalia's Geistcaller indestructible. We're going to be casting lots of spells from our graveyard, right? So I think that fits. And I really like Redain. Redain, God of the Worthy. This is a card, again, that I thought you could put in any deck. Literally any deck you could put this in, and either the front side or the back side is going to be super useful for you. I would probably put it in the deck anyway, but because we can blink it, we can play Valkmira Protector's Shield, which is just going to be great at reducing damage to us and whatnot. And then later in the game, maybe we want that ability that Redain has where non-creature spells your opponents cast with converted mana cost 4 or greater cost 2 more to cast, right? That's probably going to happen a lot more later in the game. So maybe we can blink our Redain when it's on the shield side and it'll come back on the Redain side. And, if our opponent wants to cast a Cyclonic Rift overloaded, now it costs 9 mana, right? Their Expropriate is going to cost 11 mana, so I think that works really well. And then how are we going to win the game? Everyone talks about win cons. I get asked that a lot in my videos. What's the win con in this deck, right? And the win con in all of my decks, almost all my decks that I make and have, the win con is the same. You just attack with your creatures. That's it. I just attack with my Cavalier of Dawn, I attack with my Lumbering Battlement, and I kill my opponents. That's how most decks win, I think. However, I did come up with a really neat strategy that I think works fantastically, that a lot of people aren't going to like, and I don't care because this is a mono white deck, so I always take liberties. Hokori Dustdrinker, 2 white, legendary creature spirit, 2/2. Lands don't untap during their controller's untap steps. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player untaps a land they control. So essentially it's a Winter Orb on a creature, right? And you can actually make a deck with this creature if you don't want to have any more friends. And this, people aren't going to love it in this deck, especially because we're going to be abusing it, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to plop down our Hokori Dustdrinker. Typically you wait until your opponents are all tapped out, then you play it. So now they're only untapping 1 land on their upkeep. And then on the opponent's end step before our turn, we're going to cast one of our blink spells, right? So we're going to cast Otherworldly Journey, or one of our blink spells. It's got to be the right one though, right? It's got to be one of the ones that say at the beginning of your next end step, return that card to the battlefield, right? So what we're going to do is on our opponent's end step, we Otherworldly Journey. And because it's already the end step, it doesn't come back, right? So now it's our turn. Hokori is in exile, all of our lands untap. So basically we're making it so that Hokori is going to affect all of our opponents and not us, right? So the next end step is going to be our end step, right? So we're going to have our turn normally, we're going to tap our lands and do whatever we want, and then at the beginning of our end step, then Hokori is going to come back and play, right? Because that's the next end step. And then all of our opponents have to be affected by it. Again, I don't know if that's a win con. It certainly is going to help us win, though, right? I just find it funny when people say, what's the win con? The win con is I kill you with my creatures, you know? The win con is I reduce your life to 0, which is the win con in 99% of decks, right? So that is it. That is Mavinda, Student's Advocate. Again, another card that when I first saw it, I was like, okay, weird ability. I don't think it's great. Maybe you play a Voltron strategy, which I don't like. I don't love Voltron decks. And then immediately, again, I just thought, hey, I wanted to do this blink theme with Feather, but I can't do that because it's one of the most popular commanders in the format. So I'll do it with Mavinda. And I really like how the deck came together. I really like the amount of blink spells I have, the amount of creatures that I can blink that give me tons and tons of value. It's a value deck, which I love. I'm a big fan of value decks. So that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.